Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I first want to pay tribute to the member for Wealden for securing this vitally important debate and for her willingness to work across this House to ensure that today Parliament will speak with one voice. May I also pay tribute to the courage that she has shown in standing up to the bullying and the intimidation of the Chinese government. The fact that she and other honourable members who are also present in this House and elsewhere have been sanctioned by Beijing for simply doing their jobs is an affront to our democracy and to this House. And we on these benches stand in solidarity with all those who have been targeted. Indeed, as the Honourable Lady and others have so rightly put it, an attack on one of us in this House is an attack on us all, and authoritarian regimes the world over should take careful note. I also want to thank contributors to the debate from these benches, including the honourable members for Bolton North East, Manchester Gordon, Grantham and Stanford, York Central, Brentford and Isleworth, Lewisham East, Mitcham and Morden and Putney, each of whom made powerful speeches. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Labour Party stands in solidarity with the Uyghur population and the other Turkic Muslims in Xinjiang who have been suffering oppression at the hands of the Chinese government. The accounts are harrowing and the evidence is clear. The mass surveillance and arbitrary detention of over 1 million Uyghur and other minority groups, the torture and the brutality, the rape, the abuse, the forced sterilisation of women, the enforced separation of children from their parents, the denial of the Uyghurs' right to practice their religion or to speak their language. We've seen the first-hand footage of shaven-headed, bound Uyghur men being led into trains at gunpoint. We've seen the video bravely recorded by Mehran Gapar from inside the forced labour camps. We've heard the first-hand accounts from Uyghur women of their treatment. And we've read the reports by Adrian Zentz and others which are based on the Chinese government's own data and directives. Ideally, a competent international court would examine this evidence, but there is no prospect that either the ICC or the ICJ will be able to do so, as this would require the consent of China. Beijing will also, of course, continue to prevent the United Nations from conducting a proper investigation in Xinjiang. Through amendments to the trade bill, we sought, with others from the party on the other benches, to create a route to genocide determination through the UK's courts or through a panel of senior law lords. But these cross-party efforts were shamefully defeated by the government. With the international routes to legal determination of genocide blocked by China and the domestic routes to legal determination blocked by the government, it falls to Parliament to take action. In February this year, an opinion by barristers at Essex Court Chambers led by Alison MacDonald QC provided a detailed legal assessment of all the available evidence. It concluded that there is a very credible case that the Chinese government's actions constitute genocide. In response, the Chambers was sanctioned by China. In March of this year, the New Lines Institute in Washington also published a legal analysis that concluded that a genocide is taking place in Xinjiang. Importantly, given that the crime of genocide requires proof of intent, both opinions concluded that the atrocities that are being perpetrated against the Uyghur are not the random acts of rogue individuals. They are the result of a conscious and carefully orchestrated campaign of oppression and persecution that is being conducted by the Chinese government. As a signatory to the 1948 Genocide Convention, the United Kingdom is legally bound to take all reasonable steps to both punish and prevent genocide. And by passing this motion today, the House would be instructing the British government to carry out these legal duties in relation to events in Xinjiang. So it is time for us in this House to take a stand and to support this motion. Today we can speak with one voice. Today we move forward with our eyes open and our shoulders broad. Today we send a clear and unambiguous message that genocide can never be met with indifference or inaction, and that attempts to bully us into silence will only strengthen our resolve. And today we shall offer the Uyghur people our unequivocal support. The question then is what should be done. Unfortunately, the government's actions thus far fall far short not just of the strength of feeling in this House, but also of its own rhetoric about the situation in Xinjiang. It has shamelessly prioritised its ability to enter into trade negotiations with China over a process to assess genocide. It was too slow in bringing forward the Magnitsky sanctions, and it continues to skirt around the edges of reforming supply chain legislation and human rights due diligence. This dither and delay must now end, and the government must take the following steps. First, it should widen the Magnitsky sanctions so that they cover a broader range of senior Chinese Communist Party officials and entities responsible for serious human rights violations in Xinjiang, including Chen Quanguo, already sanctioned by our allies in the United States. Second, it must support the work of the Uyghur People's Tribunal, which is hearing evidence from those affected. Third, it must engage diplomatically to build wider support for UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to gain access to Xinjiang, in particular working to engage countries, many of which are friends and partners of the UK, which have, regrettably to date, been sheltering China from international scrutiny. Fourth, it must continue to explore legal routes to justice through international courts and mechanisms. The Foreign Secretary should seek to introduce a General Assembly resolution requesting an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the question of genocide. We should also explore legal avenues via other international treaties and conventions, such as the Convention Against Torture, to which China is a signatory. We must do what we can to seek justice and accountability. Fifth, there must be consequences for the bilateral economic relationship. Will the Minister make this commitment today by confirming the continued suspension of JETCO and the EFD? Sixth, we all recognise that British businesses should not be supporting slave labour in Xinjiang. When will this House be presented with legislation strengthening the Modern Slavery Act so that companies have a responsibility to demonstrate that their supply chains are free of forced labour and that there would be meaningful sanctions for non-compliance? Mr. Deputy Speaker, successive Conservative governments since 2010 have been profoundly naive and complacent in their dealings with China. The so-called Golden Era policy was the very definition of a sellout, with Conservative leaders turning a blind eye to human rights abuses and sacrificing our national security on the altar of narrow commercial interests. A more coherent and clear strategy is urgently required, and yet we do, unfortunately, see division on the government benches, with a caucus of Conservative members taking a principled stance, whilst the Foreign Secretary says one thing in public and something entirely different in private, and Number 10 appears to be desperate to do a trade deal with China at literally any price. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we need to lead by example when it comes to international law, not undermine our country's authority and credibility by breaking international law ourselves. And we need to be building bridges with our partners and allies in Europe and elsewhere who face the same challenges in their relationship with China, rather than constantly losing friends and alienating people. Because the Chinese Communist Party respects strength, consistency and unity, and it is contemptuous of weakness and division. Democracy around the world, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is in retreat. Authoritarian regimes are in the ascendancy, and the rules-based international order is under threat. So it is all the more important that we in this House stand united today. I therefore call on the Minister to support this motion, to implement the actions that I have set out, and to urge the government to do all it can to prevent and to punish those who are committing genocide against the Uyghur in Xinjiang. Thank you.